Well, welcome back to Closer to Christ, our webinar series introducing you to this year's Lenten studies. I'm Magrey and deVega. In our first episode, we spoke with Adam Hamilton about his new study, The Lord's Prayer. And in case you missed that session, you can go to amplifymedia.com and follow the free resources to watch it. Well, today it is my honor to speak with Dr. Amy-Jill Levine, who is the Rabbi Stanley M. Kessler Distinguished Professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies at the Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, and the University Professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies, Emerita. Mary Jane Worthen, Professor of Jewish Studies, Emerita, Professor of New Testament Studies, Emerita, at Vanderbilt University. AJ is also the author of many books, including her new study for Lent, and it's called Witness at the Cross, A Beginner's Guide to Holy Friday. AJ, it is so great to be with you today.
A pleasure to be with you as well. Thank you.
Well, many Lenten studies focus on widely explored topics, like the events of Holy Week or some of the better-known characters of the Gospels like Peter or Judas, or symbols for the Passion. But this study is unique in that it centers just on the hours related to Jesus' death and explores some of the lesser-known people that we would otherwise ignore who were there at the cross itself, including bystanders who are nameless in the Gospels. I'm wondering what drew you to about this unique aspect.
Each gospel tells the story differently, and therefore there's a different population group in each gospel, and people say different things. Or the women looking on from a distance as they are in Mark, or is Mary Magdalene and the mother of Jesus like right there at the cross? So I got interested in, well, why are these stories told in such different ways? Because I have spent a number of years teaching here in Nashville at Riverbend Maximum Security Institute, which is a prison, and I've also done some work on death row. I was particularly interested in the Gospel of Luke, that account of the two other men who were crucified along with Jesus, and who took care of their bodies, and who was standing there in support of them or mourning them, and then who else is there, and what are they saying? To talk about the people who were scoffing at Jesus, he's dying, he's being tortured to death. And then to add to it, people are mocking him and teasing him. So what are all these people doing? And what are we supposed to learn from them? The gospel writers put them there for a reason. What might that reason be? What's the takeaway? We're not dying on a cross with Jesus. We're there watching him die. That's Holy Friday. And that's what we think about. And these people, these characters, become mechanisms by which we can place ourselves at the cross, but in different roles, and say, what do I learn from the women? What do I learn from the bystanders? What do I learn from Joseph of Arimathea, who takes the body down? What do I learn from the daughters of Jerusalem who were mourning Jesus? How can I go more deeply into the gospel? By looking at these characters the gospel writers have so thankfully given us.
Well, it's that spirit of wonder and curiosity that apparently drew your interest to the book, and that wonder and curiosity carries throughout all of the chapters as you ask imaginative, playful questions. In fact, one of the common themes that I picked up in the book are these imaginary conversations you're having with the gospel writers themselves. You're playfully pondering the narrative gaps that you're filling with some imaginative options. Why do you think that spirit of wonder and curiosity is important in our approach to the Bible, but especially when it comes to the events of Holy Week?
Unless we use our imagination, the text is just going to be words on a page. It comes to life for us, and therefore it has greater meaning if we can place ourselves in the narrative and figure out with whom do I identify, or whose view am I going to resist, and why am I going to resist that? If the text is going to have any meaning to the community that holds it sacred, it can't simply remain words on a page, and it can't simply remain a first century text. It has to come in to 2022 and say, what meaning does it have for us today? And it turns out that the Gospels, the Bible itself, is timeless because it raises questions that we're still raising today. Somebody is dying for capital punishment. If you don't think capital punishment is a good idea, what do you do? Is it okay to go out and sing songs and hold a candle? Or do you do something more? Somebody you love is dying. What does that mean for you? And how can you provide comfort for that person? When you feel that God is absent, and clearly Jesus, at least in Mark and Matthew, feels that, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then how do you find the presence of God? And the presence of God is not only in the faces of the people who love you, but the Gospels tell us that God is present. So that when we have the rending of the temple veil, that's not contrary to all these different sermons. Oh, God is now available to everybody. No, God's always been available to people. That's not the issue. But rending your garment in Judaism is a sign of mourning. So this is God's way of saying, I am in mourning too. The heavens are rent once again.
Yeah.
Or there's darkness and there's an earthquake. Nature is in mourning. So even when you think nobody's paying attention to me and I'm alone, it turns out you're not. So there's so much there where only imagination will bring these various views to life. And through our imagination, there's an old spiritual, like, were you there when they crucified him? Right. Well, think about that.
Right.
It's not just in the music, but it's in the presence. If you were there, what would you say to the priest who comes out to mock? What would you say to the centurion who's standing guard? It's like, do you know what you're doing? And then when the centurion in Mark and Matthew says, surely this man was a son of God. Yeah. Is he being facetious? Like, this guy, you've got to be kidding. Or I suddenly realized something. It's power in weakness. It's death, but he knows that death is not the end. There's something going on here that I had never recognized until this man dies. Good God. I mean, literally.
Well, and in fact, you quote that hymn in the book at just in the moment that you're talking about. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Sometimes it causes me to tremble. It's a story that invites not only our playful imagination, but our personal connection, an immersive experience of this story to see how we might connect to it today. In fact, as I was reading through your book, I thought about moments when I have accompanied people in the shadow of a loved one's death. And I suspect many people who are viewing this now and who will read your book will think about their experience of gathered witnesses as a loved one is dying, or in the wake of a loved one's funeral. And these are occasions when different people with different aspects of the person's story, different witnesses, will come together and share their stories, their perspectives, their opinions on their loved one. And it seems to me that the gospel writers are all creating that kind of diversity of witnesses. Why do you think these witnesses are so important to these different gospel writers? The gospel writers could have easily just stuck to the facts, right? And just in terms of saying what happened to Jesus and been very mechanical about the events related to Jesus' death. And as you point out, to infuse these stories with perspectives of witnesses. Why do you think that's so important to each evangelist to do so?
Yeah, well, it's an act of imagination on their part as well, because at least for Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they weren't there. I mean, Luke's not an eyewitness. He tells us he talked with people who were there. But according to Mark, all the disciples forsook him and fled, and the women from Galilee are looking on the Greek as makron, from a distance, right? So was Mark there? Well, not according to Mark. Was Matthew there? Not according to Matthew. It's only in the Gospel of John where you have the beloved disciple, a disciple standing there. So they're probably using their own imaginations to reconstruct what happened. And that's why we have 4 different stories. So should we become all apoplectic? Oh my God, there were 4 different stories and which one's right? I mean, that's not the question. The question is, the gospel writers have provided us with these 4 different stories because we're going to learn something different from each one. So if we look at Mark, the focus on Jesus as dying alone. My God, why have you forsaken me? The disciples have forsook him and fled. The women are at a distance, and the only people who are up close are soldiers who are casting lots for his garment, right? So they're playing dice. And then you get some scoffers coming by, if you're the son of God, come on down. And it's that sense of absence.
Yeah.
But then I think, well, okay, so I'm one of these women and I'm at a distance. Am I too afraid to come? I could get arrested. Am I so traumatized by this? This is my Lord who's dying, right? I can't come any closer.
Right.
I'm afraid to come any closer. How do we put ourselves in their shoes? And what are they thinking? You're watching from a distance. And what angle do you see? Do you challenge? When we come to Luke with the daughters of Jerusalem, who are a different group than the women from Galilee. When we get to John, when we have the mother of Jesus who's there, and Mary Magdalene who's there, and the beloved disciple who's there, and they're right there. And Jesus is having a conversation with them and setting up a new family unit. Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. Each one has a different message of loneliness and despair, and nevertheless hope. Because when you say, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's the beginning of Psalm 22. And Psalm 22 ends with the universal acclamation of God, right? Mm-hmm. So Mark is basically saying, I'm going to give you part one. It's your job to fill in part two. You're those women who are looking on. You're the ones who are going to the tomb. What are you going to say when you find out the tomb is empty? Yeah. Matthew adapts it a little bit. Luke adapts it even more, and John tells quite a different story. Put ourselves in all of those positions. So in John, we see not a suffering, dying individual who's lost control, not somebody who's humiliated, but somebody who is reigning from that cross, as Jesus talks about, when I am lifted up. He's in complete control of everything. Mm-hmm. When do we identify with somebody who's dying with no control? When do we identify with that power and that might and that authority? Mm-hmm. The Gospels say you don't have to choose. You can do this one today and this one tomorrow. And this one when you're in a system of calm and peace. And this one when you need that support. It's your choice.
What I love about your imaginative interpretation here is that we're largely familiar with the main characters of the gospel that lead up to Holy Week. And in fact, if you look at it in a way, you go from the large crowds at Palm Sunday to the followers, to, as the week goes on in Holy Week, you get the 12 disciples and then the select three, Peter, James, and John, and then Peter alone in the courtyard. And by the time you get to the cross, with the exception, perhaps, as you say in the book of John, the beloved disciple, by the time you get to the witnesses that you describe in the book, it's essentially a new cast of characters. Mm-hmm. And it's, as I'm listening to you speak, I wonder if that is the evangelist's way of breaking the fourth wall, to use a theatrical term, mm-hmm. and say, let's pan the camera away from the characters you know. They have slowly been dissipated away from the main stage. And now we get new witnesses that are actually invitations for us to be part of this grand story. And is it possible that these witnesses are spokespeople for us? They're gateways for us. They're invitations for us to live out that hymn, "Were you there when they crucified the Lord?" Do you think that's possibly what's happening here for the evangelists?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's all. So okay. I'm about to be a little bit geeky, right? Because I'm basically an historian. So when you read Bioi, that's where we get the term biography, right? So lives of ancient people. In antiquity, if you have a bios, a life, the really important thing is the person about, and they're all men, right? So the guy whom we're talking about. And what the minor characters are doing is they're there to tell you something about that guy. So we both have the opportunity of identifying with these witnesses, but the next question would be, in antiquity, this would really be the case. What did the witnesses tell us about Jesus? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? He's politically dangerous. Mm-hmm. He's so important that I've left my home and my family, and I've gone from Galilee to Jerusalem, and now I'm watching him die. He's that important. Mm-hmm. He's somebody just like me who's dying on a cross, and yet he's not just like me, because one of the two thieves or bandits, and you can debate on how you want to translate that Greek, says to Jesus, when you come into your kingdom, the first person in the gospel, he knows Jesus has a kingdom. Nobody else got that one figured out. Right. So they tell us something about Jesus, about what Jesus means in their lives. And then we can take that next step and say, well, at what point do we identify? At what point do we say that's them? This is me. At what point can we say, since we now have, as you pointed out, this host of new characters, can we put ourselves there as well and say, when we encounter Jesus, not only what does that say about us, but what does that say about Jesus? Because as far as I can tell, everybody encounters Jesus distinctly.
Yeah.
Right. He's not a cookie cutter sort of guy. And Christology doesn't have to be cookie cutter either.
And that's evident in the way you highlight the unique names that various witnesses ascribe to Jesus. I didn't know, and I could have misread that one of the bits in Mark is the only one to name him Jesus, to name him by name in the whole Gospel of Mark. That's fascinating. And then you talk about the bystanders who essentially name him the King of the Jews through that transcription, and then the centurion who names him the Son of God. I think what you're talking about is evident in the names that people use to describe Jesus as they are there at the cross.
Right. And then you have to fill in what the meaning is. So it's not the Son of God, it's a Son of God. Because this is Rome and they're polytheists. And you could have, like Hercules and Perseus, Augustus Caesar, right? They're all sons of God. And yet then you have to figure, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is it a political statement? Is it deification? As I know, it could be sarcastic. Is he speaking from his own pagan background to say, well, that's the title that I would use here? He's got a divine father. Yeah, a son of God makes some sort of sense. And then you have to figure out, well, how do I react to that today? Or the centurion in the Gospel of Luke, who proclaims him dikaios. It's sometimes translated innocent, but it really means righteous. He didn't do anything wrong. This guy is guiltless. And then what does it mean that somebody recognizes that he's just put to death somebody who did not deserve to be put to death? And what does that do to our conscience? And what does that say about Jesus, who he's not guilty and yet he's put to death? And how do we make sure that that death has some sort of meaning?
Right. Well, I couldn't help but notice throughout your book that you often make very clear and compelling connections to contemporary issues that we are dealing with today, connecting the perspectives of these witnesses with struggles that we face in the world today, such as the relationship between church and state, immigration at the border, you mentioned, capital punishment, criminal justice and prison reform, the use of torture, the role of worship to summon us to a love of God and love of neighbor. And you ask at one point toward the beginning of the book, are lighting candles and praying enough? I found that to be a very powerful question that really prompts action as a result of hearing these witnesses. How do you think an experience of the cross not only calls us to remembrance, but also summons us to action?
Yeah. I think it's a combination, but the first thing we have to do is do the remembering. And that's the problem with Good Friday. If Good Friday had been a Sunday and people had the day off, then you could spend more time with it. But I find so many people, they want to rush from Palm Sunday to Easter. And Good Friday is just kind of, let's get through with it. Holy Saturday, yeah, watch a football game. Let's get to Sunday. I want people to spend time with Good Friday, and those witnesses help us spend time with Good Friday. They slow the narrative down. And as you pointed out, it goes from the disciples and all that. It goes from day to day, then to hour to hour to hour. And the witnesses help us take time with Good Friday. Right. So in order to remember it, we've got to think about it in the first place. Yeah. I also think it should be a call to action, to talk about governments that kill people, to talk about people in the military who were asked to do things that their consciences say to them, you know what, I don't think I can do that. To talk about when do you join a revolutionary movement, which may have been the case with the two on either side of Jesus. When do you take violence into your own hands, and when do you say, I'm just going to sit here with my candle and my hymn, but I'm not quite ready to take the next step. Yeah. For people who are against capital punishment, to say, do I stand outside and sing "We Shall Overcome" and hold my candle, or do I storm the prison? And I would never ask anybody to do that. And I think I would be too scared to do it myself, but boy, I feel that way sometimes.
Mm.
The New Testament asks me
Mhm.
about that. It
Mhm.
interrogates me, and that's what a good scripture text should do.
And in fact, you end your study, not to give away the ending, but you end the study with a beautifully crafted invitation to, quote, pick up the story of the gospel ourselves and allow it to shape us into the future. So, what is your hope of how that will happen in and through this study as we approach Lent this year?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. Thanks for that. Um, if we pay attention to these so-called minor characters, as well as pay attention to the presence of God that we might not have noted in nature in the rending of the temple veil, um, it's not just, oh, the cross is not the end of the story. The cross is what you spend time with before you get to the end of the story, because the cross is what indicts us. It asks us, where is our support for those who are suffering? It asks us, can we believe despite what we see with our own eyes? It
Mhm.
asks us if we can make this death meaningful. It says to us, if you were there, what would you have done? Where's comfort to be found? For example, in community or in a psalm, or in just walking the walk along with Jesus, who talks about taking up your cross, in Luke, taking up your cross daily. It asks us to remember what we've forgotten. The introduction starts with Simon of Cyrene.
Mhm.
And I spent a little time talking about Cyrene because nobody knows where it is,
Right.
right? And they go, oh, it's Libya. I don't know where that. Oh, Benghazi. Oh, now we can talk about something. Or to talk about this very vibrant Jewish community in Libya, and there are no Jews left anymore. So who's at the cross that represents people that we don't have anymore? What have we lost to history? What does this help us recover? Who are the daughters of Jerusalem today? Who is the Roman centurion today? Who is Nicodemus who helps Joseph of Arimathea? And does he ever get with the program? And does it matter? So even if we think about Nicodemus, I like Nicodemus. And I think he's really well-meaning. And I think he's also fairly clueless, but he does the right thing. He stands up for Jesus. He comes and he helps bury Jesus. He and Joseph of Arimathea entomb Jesus under 100 pounds of myrrh. That's a lot of myrrh. So they don't think he's coming back. You know, it's one thing to be resurrected, but to claw your way out of 100 pounds of myrrh. I mean, that's like added. He doesn't think he's coming back. I find him so sympathetic. You know, he's trying to get with the program and he's just not there. And I kind of identify with him because I'm not a worshiper of Jesus either. But the story of Jesus works on me and calls me to account and challenges me. And my thought is, if it works on me so much, surely it should work even more on those who worship him as Lord and Savior. Spend time with this text because it's ethically challenging and inspirational at the same time. So what do you take away? You take away all those multiple challenges that
Mhm.
the people who were at the cross took away before Easter Sunday, and you sit with that.
Well, people who read this study will forever read the stories of the Gospels and not glance over any of these widely overlooked characters again. And I believe because of your study, they will introspective questions of them to pick up the story and make it their own and make it impactful for the world we live in today. This time has just flown by, but our time has come to an end, and I can't thank you enough for this time together and for this incredibly provocative and accessible book. Thank you so much, AJ.
Yeah, thank you so much for your kind words and your good questions.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you've been inspired today by both of these conversations as we approach the Lenten season. If you're interested in learning more, we invite you to visit amplifymedia.com and follow the free resources link. And there you will find resources related to these studies, thanks to Amplify Media. And you may watch the first episode of each of these studies for free. Thank you to Amplify Media for sponsoring this series. Visit their site to learn more about the resources they provide church. I really do hope that this coming Lenten season will be a blessed one for you as we journey toward the cross and into the joy of the resurrection and Easter. And may these studies bring you deeper insights into the Gospels and the impact that they can make in and through your lives. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.